Hello, and you are listening to Bill Murphy's Red Zone podcast. If you are listening for the first time, I interview leaders who inspire me in the areas of hardcore IT security, IT business leadership, innovation, creativity, entrepreneurship, and fearless living principles. Welcome to the show. Hello, and welcome to episode number 40 of the Red Zone podcast, where I invite IT security innovators, leading entrepreneurial minds, and wildly inspiring individuals to share their stories and offer tips to help you achieve success as an IT and business leader. I'm your host, Bill Murphy, and in today's show, I'm enthusiastic to bring to you my interview with Rahul Kashyap, one of Silicon Valley's 40 under 40. He's the Chief Security Architect and Executive Vice President at Bromium, where he's responsible for R&D, product security, Bromium Labs, and industry outreach. He's also written several research papers, blogs, and articles, and is widely quoted around the world. He's been instrumental in building several security technologies like network IPS, host IPS, web application firewalls, whitelisting, and micro-virtualization. He's also been awarded several patents for his innovations. Now, I've been tracking Bromium for a couple of years because they have a novel approach to endpoint security using virtualization isolation that I thought you might like to learn about. Now, don't get scared off by this term, virtualization isolation. It's fascinating, and I think it's a fantastic approach. And I really hope you enjoy my interview with Rahul Kashyap. Well, Rahul, I want to welcome you to the show today.
It's a pleasure to be here, Bill.
So I've been waiting for this conversation for a while because I've been watching Bromium for quite a number of years, ever since a conference in which I listened to, I think it was Simon. Is Simon still your CEO?
He's a CTO, yes. Simon Crosby. Yes.
Simon, right. And he was quite a character. And I remember listening to him and I thought, gosh, I've got to track this company. And so one thing led to another, and a couple of years later, you and I are talking and just reading about your background. I was very excited for our listeners to learn a little bit about yourself. Maybe we could start there, and then we'll go into a little bit more about what you do. But you live in Silicon Valley, correct?
That's right. I'm based out of here in the Valley.
So you won the 40 under 40 award. And I think that's interesting for me because there's a lot of people in Silicon Valley. How did you come to win the award, the 40 under 40?
Yeah, first of all, I'm pretty humbled to win that award. I think it happened a couple of years back. Well, I guess I was chosen as I was one of the young people and who were kind of young leaders in the industry, specifically in the cybersecurity. And cybersecurity has been a pretty big problem. And I was just fortunate to be selected there.
Well, I think it says a lot for yourself because I was reading a little bit about that article and you used the word unstoppable. Actually, I'm curious, why did you say that? Why did you say unstoppable?
Yeah, I think one key, and this is kind of the lessons I have learned in my life in the past few years of leading teams and leadership and building companies from scratch. When you're challenging, when you're building a company or a startup such as Bromium, for example, right, you are pretty much against all the odds. Nobody believes in when you start because we are doing something very, very radically different, and you are full of people who just say no to you. So you have to really believe in yourself to the point where, unless you really prove it, inside out, that you're just going to be unstoppable. And only when you're unstoppable, you can really make a difference and really get a high impact in whatever field of life you choose, right? So for me, it's cybersecurity, and I've been very passionate about it ever since I got out of grad school almost 15 years ago. And yeah, I think that's kind of what drives me. I think unstoppable is a function of being passionate about something and just believing in yourself and that, you're going to make it happen.
So where'd you learn that, Rahul? Is that something that you just feel like you had the unique DNA for, or did you learn that growing up? Where's the genesis of that? Because clearly you have taken on some big challenges with Bromium and prior to that, just reading about your background with other startups. Where did you get that from?
Yeah, I think it probably came back in my upbringing. My dad was a serial entrepreneur himself. And one of the things which I learned as I used to watch him, try out things and fail and come back again. And so that kind of gave me a very good lot of lessons learned there in my upbringing there. So I would say thanks to a lot of that. And earlier, when you're young, you didn't really appreciate that a lot. But now, later on in life, you really realize the importance of all of those valuable conversations you had. I think what I have seen in my life, I've had very humble beginnings. So I've seen a lot of failures and successes. So I think that's kind of what tempers you a bit. And also, you learn a lot of lessons as you go along. So I always believe in learning, all the time. I'm always learning from people, no matter what roles or responsibilities they have. So, I think it's probably a culmination of a lot of environmental factors, I would say.
Well, I noticed in this one interview that you said you believe in taking on big challenges, and then all the small ones seem to disappear. And clearly security is a big challenge right now. But I don't find that everybody wants to take on a big challenge. And maybe because they think it's going to be a big amount of effort or something. Why do you think it's important to take on big challenges versus small challenges? Could you explain that a little bit for me?
Sure. So I can probably give you an example of Mahatma Gandhi, right? So this is a lesson which I have come across through some of people I have watched and books I have read. So he took on a challenge that this country called India will be free, right? When you take on a big mission, the small challenges, the small problems in life disappear. So, for example, when he took on a challenge that a country will be free, he probably wasn't arguing with his people in his life about the quality of food or what he was wearing, because he had a mission, he had a drive, and he had all of his energies were focused in that, right? So I believe that we are a function of the problems we choose, because big problems get you focused to bigger challenges, and then your whole life has a bigger context as opposed to looking at the smaller aspects of life which don't work, right? So that's kind of the way I look at approaching my life, and that's kind of what really inspires me.
That does take a lot of courage. That's a really interesting perspective. It's actually the second time I've heard that in the past. Gosh, maybe I heard that 2 weeks ago. It was a lecture, and the person had the same philosophy, or maybe it was Peter Diamandis. He was talking in the lecture, and it was saying that he believes in going for moonshots, which you're not using the word moonshot, but you're saying take on the big challenge. I guess even if you don't hit the main target with a big challenge, you're going to fall somewhere amongst very far along the path.
That's true. Yeah.
Interesting. So you're the chief security architect and EVP at Bromium. So let's give our listeners a little bit of understanding about. So we talked about big challenges. One of the big challenges is endpoint security. And maybe just a brief overview. What is the big challenge that Bromium has started to tackle a couple years ago? And then maybe we can telescope in. I have some couple questions for you related to that, but maybe we could start at a higher level first.
Sure, absolutely. So what we found is that in the last few years, the whole threat landscape has changed dramatically, right? So, and I've been kind of tracking this for the past 15 years, ever since, I would say, even before the cybersecurity industry really formulated, right? And most of the products that we have trying to block or prevent these attacks are trying to create a better heuristic or a better form of detection to identify threats. And that's kind of my background. Before Bromium, I used to lead the worldwide threat research teams at McAfee as well, McAfee Labs, where I learned a lot from my peers and the industry. So I would say one of the key problems today that we encounter is that, first of all, attackers have kind of found a sweet spot, which is the end user, right? No matter how smart users you have, users are prone to making mistakes. And for online security, all it takes is one click. Right? It's one bad click in a URL, a spearfish email, and the attackers are in, right? And that's all it takes. So to kind of put it in a different way, the attackers, the odds against the attackers, they're not in our favor. They actually favor the attackers because, first of all, the attackers have nothing to lose, which means that cybersecurity will continue to be a big problem. Secondly, you really can't solve this problem because end users will continue to make mistakes. So no matter how many signatures you come out with for every next strain of malware, they will continue to click on these links and they will get compromised. So that was a very, very interesting and a very special problem, which I think the industry was really struggling to solve. And we built out Bromium to kind of focus on that use case. And now we have obviously expanded the portfolio and the platform. But the whole idea is that nobody can build the perfect detection engine. It's just impossible, right? It's mathematically flawed. It's not going to happen. And we have enough proof points of that. So the whole theory behind Bromium is that what if you can just contain the attack in a way where it's seamless for the end user, where the end users can barely know that the attack is getting contained, and then let the attack play out, but make sure that the user never gets infected. So in this way, you have kind of created a very unique solution where you are allowing users to make mistakes, which they will, right? So instead of trying to prevent it by using signatures or adding new prevention technologies, we're just trying to contain the attack and stitch the UX to a point where it's seamless for the end users.
Sorry to interrupt you, but I can't help it. This to me sounds like the way the human body fights infection. It's like the human body, I mean, unless you're really taken down, the human body can deal with a cut or a scrape or a wound by isolating that event and mitigating that event. But it doesn't necessarily take down the entire body for the vast majority of situations. The troops, essentially, the white blood cells are deployed to the area of attack, but it seems like almost like the model of an overall organic system.
Yeah. This theory is used in various areas of life. Absolutely, I agree with you. So the concept is definitely something which is not unique or new. This has been tried and tested in several regions, several areas of life, including medicine, right? So like when you go to a doctor, the first thing they do is they wear gloves before they treat you, right? So that they don't get infected as they are treating you, for example. So that's kind of what we're trying to do here. It's kind of a completely fresh approach. And why I teamed up with Ian and Simon is they are the pioneers in virtualization. So it's a complete fresh pair of eyes for the security problem. So we have kind of been together for almost like 4.5 years, and it's been just incredible here.
The other point is you can't eliminate human error. So because 85% of the attacks are really caused by a human error. So you're saying that we're not going to tackle the scope and scale of preventing all human error. You're going to deal with it at the system side and know that it's going to happen. And your unique approach is, what would you call your unique approach from an industry term, micro virtualization?
That's right.
So the concept is security with micro virtualization.
That's right.
Okay.
So, and how it works in action, in just like a couple of sentences is basically, just imagine that every time you visit a website or you visit the internet, we literally create a laptop for that session. And once you're done, we throw it away, right? So it's like almost like a self-healing system, so that we assume that the attack might happen somewhere, but we don't know where it's going to come from. But it will always be contained, and it will be contained in the scope of a virtual machine.
Are you virtualizing the application within the device, or are you virtualizing the entire user session?
So we are virtualizing it at a task level. Every click will create a separate micro VM, which is a very lightweight micro VM, only a few megabytes in size.
Oh, so you're down at the task level. You're at the not at the application or the session. You're way deeper than that. You're at where the executable is. You're almost isolating the executable.
Yes, exactly. And so this is kind of we call it almost like a next-gen way of doing virtualization, but designed specifically for security.
When you talk about endpoints in human error, are you just isolated to laptop devices and PCs and such, or are you referring all the way down to tablets and phones?
So we do work on laptops and desktops, and we do work on tablets as well. The support for phones, we haven't added yet. We are looking at the market, and at some point we will take a stab at it, but probably not this year.
Okay, so the concept here is that I want to capture for myself and I want to capture for our listeners is that this micro virtualization, this concept of micro virtualization is not at the VMware or Citrix or Microsoft host level. And it's not even at the app level where you're virtualizing the app, but it's at a deeper level. It's at the executable side. So if I captured that correctly?
Yeah. So although we micro virtualize specific applications like your browser and so on, we don't micro virtualize any arbitrary application yet. Although technically it's possible, we don't do that yet. But yeah, conceptually, what you said is pretty much there. Yeah.
Okay. So now let's go into why for a moment, the why this is important, because in my research, I was looking at some of your Bromium labs. Now, it's a little bit older and dated, but I don't think it's any less relevant. And first of all, what is Bromium Labs?
Yeah, so Bromium Labs, so I kind of created Bromium Labs a few years back, and we have kind of some of the top-notch talent in the industry, ranging from hypervisor security to pen testing to fuzzing. We are basically a bunch of security hackers and experts. And the intention of Bromium Labs is to basically, first of all, there are multiple things we're trying to accomplish at Bromium Labs. First of all, we are trying to preempt attacks in the sense that we do write exploits, we do offensive security with the attempt to make it better. So we look at the latest and greatest technologies and products and see what are the ways attackers could break out of them or bypass them. And then we work with the vendors and fix them, and then present in conferences like Black Hat. And then on top of that, we also look at the threat landscape. The whole team is focused on looking at the threat landscape, how it's evolving, and are our products current with the evolving threat landscape. So we brief our customers and let them know about the latest happenings. Just today, I'm kind of finalizing the Bromium Labs annual threat report, where we are looking at the key trends. It should be out next month, most likely. So that's kind of some of the key areas of focus of Bromium Labs, and I'm really happy to have some of the top-notch, best talent in the industry be a part of my team.
Well, I was reading one of the articles, and it was a really good reading, and I'm going to refer to that in a moment. But I just had a quick question about what's a defensive security versus offensive, the way you frame it. Can you give me an example of offensive security?
Sure. Offensive security is pretty much, I would say, where I'm writing an exploit or finding out a way to break out of or bypass a technology. It could be an operating system or it could be a security technology. So where I'm actually trying to exploit it and break out of their security model. Right, and it's a little bit more sophisticated than just, say, for example, writing a malware to bypass an antivirus. So we try to do it at a design architectural level to showcase the fundamental limitation of a technology. And this is kind of important because I think this is kind of what is critical, because this is how attackers think. So I really believe that every security company should invest in an offense structure, because it helps your products get better, and at the same time you're looking at it from an attacker's perspective and not just trying to build from a defender's perspective. And a defender's perspective is basically, how can I make that attack fail, or how can I prevent that attack? So that's kind of the defensive stance of the offensive side. So it's kind of I would say, two sides of a coin with a very different goal, but I think it kind of can make your security practice very robust and practical, I would say.
So I want to understand that in some detail, because I think you're onto something, and I just want to make sure I understand. I don't put words in your mouth. So would you agree that the natural assumption is that we have been hacked for most companies?
Yeah, I would say to a large extent, that's true.
So if we have been hacked, and we essentially it's quietly we have an attacker that's quietly, surreptitiously there behind the firewall, metaphorically, if we're going hunting, essentially. So what you're saying is, instead of sitting back playing defense, you are saying we need to go hunting, basically hunting for someone behind our four walls. And that's kind of me. I might be butchering what you're saying a bit, but what exactly would the philosophy be, and how would someone approach their security operations center with an offensive approach in mind?
Yeah, so I think we can probably just simplify offense and defense as why and how. So offense gives you the insight on why did the product fail. You basically recreate a scenario where you bypass the firewall with the attacker bypass, and you figure out how you've managed to bypass and get into my network. So that's kind of a part of an offense where you actually demonstrate that with your technical ability, for example. And then the defense is, how can I prevent that from happening? How can I build a perimeter or a defense layer where I make sure that this doesn't happen again? So I think they kind of go hand in hand together, because only when you really understand the limitations of what you have can you really build or create an architecture where you can prevent that from happening. Does that make sense?
It sure does. Now back to the Bromium Lab question, because this published article, which I do have a reason for asking this. And for our listeners, I don't want to back off the technology here, because listeners have to understand what is going on so that we can not only tee up what Bromium's doing, but I want people to understand from just why this is happening on our corporate networks. It's a couple years old from Bromium Labs, but I think it has relevance. Maybe you could just walk me through it. So it's called VM Introspection, Creating New Frontiers for Live Forensics. That was the magazine article. And it was called Unearthing and Profiling Sophisticated x64 Bit Kernel Boot Kits that Continue to Leverage Holes in Windows 7, which is now Windows 10. So this will go to the Windows 10 a little bit later. But It's basically coming down to malware analysis and why it's so hard for security operations centers to be able to perform malware analysis, and where some of the limitations were and what is going on. Like, why is antivirus and host intrusion prevention systems, why are they so unreliable? I've just read recently that antivirus is about 5% effective in finding malware. But why is AV and HIPS overall so unreliable? Maybe we can start there
Sure.
at finding these things.
Yeah, I think it's just a technology thing. Every technology has a shelf life, right? So for antivirus, it's been there for like 30 years, and the whole threat landscape has dramatically changed. But to be fair, it's not that antiviruses haven't changed at all. They have also evolved, but fundamentally, the design principles haven't really changed. And the design principle is basically simple, which is I will try to detect the attack. And how do I detect it? It's by using some kind of a behavior or a pattern. And the malware guys authors have actually found out ways to create billions of different variations of these patterns and heuristics to ensure that they can bypass antiviruses, right? So no doubt, antiviruses are kind of failing, and that fail is just dramatic, and probably will continue to be so, to the point where it probably wouldn't really make much sense to have an antivirus. I would say it's a classic example of technology evolution, and it's a similar thing applies with host intrusion prevention systems. They were designed to specifically block vulnerabilities, because if you block a vulnerability, you can possibly block or stop the attempt of the malware getting dropped. Right, so it was slightly better or more efficient than the design of antiviruses. But attackers have found out, first of all, there are so many vulnerabilities and so many exploits now. It's just kind of blown out of proportions from the times when these technologies were designed. So host IPS technology came around early 2000, and antivirus was in the 1990s. If you look at the entire threat landscape, it has just dramatically changed. So obviously, I would say it's pretty much a complete technology refresh is required, and that's why there is so much of disruption happening on the endpoint security industry specifically right now.
Okay, that makes sense. And so as this was going on, this write up, it was talking about what the exploit does to really two areas: this master boot record and this volume boot record. And could you talk about this MBR and VBR, the volume boot record and master boot record, as it relates to what Bromium does to this micro virtualization, or I've also read the hardware enforced isolation. So these are two techniques that you guys have created to solve this big problem. And I'd love you to talk about like what the problem is at the MBR and VBR level, and then how you're approaching it from this hardware enforced isolation.
Sure, absolutely. So there are two things. First of all, our first job is to make sure that you don't get infected, right? And how we do that is by using micro virtualization. We create these lightweight VMs which are available on demand, and we can create hundreds and hundreds of those on any average laptop. So that's the first technology breakthrough. The second is, what if in any of those sessions there was malware? You visit the website, you open say 100 pages. What if 2 of those actually contain malware, right? So in a large enterprise, you would like to know about it in case you encountered malware. And the fact that the malware is already contained gives us very interesting opportunities to actually capture and record whatever happened inside that micro VM. And that's we built a product out of that called Lava, which is live attack visualization and analysis. That is the article which I wrote a few years back on VM introspection. And how it actually works is we try to look at the attack from the hypervisor. We have built a custom hypervisor, and the hypervisor can actually look at what's happening inside each VM. And if you're doing that, the technique is called VM introspection. With that, the advantage is that you are almost close to being tamper-proof, because the malware doesn't have the access or privilege to disable the hypervisor because it is contained in the context of the VM. So it gives us a very robust way or a mechanism to look at very sophisticated malware such as bootkits and rootkits, which try to persist in an operating system by overwriting the MBR, VBR records, basically. In the specific example which you took, where you use VBR or MBR overwrites, pretty much are used by bootkits. And the whole idea is that if you can overwrite that, you can survive across reboots. Even if you reboot, that MBR, VBR will always persist. And
okay, I see. So it doesn't get rid of it on a reboot, but yes, it persists. Okay.
Yeah. Typically, kernel level malware use such techniques. And it's been a pain for a lot of technologies on the endpoint, specifically because, if you have a kernel mode malware and if you're exploiting the OS kernel, you have the same privilege as that of any other product you have. Pretty much, it's like you have system level privilege, right? So at that point, you can't really detect the malware because it has same access. The malware has same privileges as that of the product itself. So that's why it's been a big challenge. And containing that and analyzing that in a lightweight VM is probably one of the most efficient ways of blocking and preventing, and at the same time analyzing such malware.
It clearly is like finding a needle in a haystack, but you're deciding to get it right down at that hardware level instead of up in the stack a little bit higher, of which AV and HIPS would try to tackle it. So that makes a lot more sense to me now. So if there already is virtualization product that is installed on the device, let's say it's a Citrix or VMware or one of their endpoints, do you need to be run in isolation with no other conflict with any other virtualization products, or do you bundle in to the overall strategy at the endpoint, the overall software stack at the endpoint?
Yeah, so first of all, most of the virtualization vendors, they allow nested virtualization, like VMware, ESX allows you to have one more hypervisor installed. So we are good with that. And we have actually tested it actually in the past year or so, and it's worked out fairly well for us. So in general, we are a type 2 hypervisor from a design perspective. So, we can sit in parallel with VMware workstation as well, and there should not be any problem as well. So that's not really a problem that we encounter very frequently.
Excellent. And it's from a management point of view, if you have 1,000 endpoints that you're managing, is it something that is centrally managed in your preference, or is it managed from a NOC that you provide from a managed services point of view, or how would you, from an security architecture, manage these endpoints?
We actually have a centralized management console, which is used for pretty much managing the entire product portfolio we have. It deploys the product, updates it, installs it, monitors the events, captures all the forensics artifacts, and forwards to the security team. So we have a complete, very comprehensive stack of management capabilities, and it's all centralized management.
And typically you're finding customers managing endpoints themselves, or do they leverage a data center NOC that they can use as a managed service from you? Yeah. What deployment option do they typically use?
Yeah, in most cases, we work with the Fortune large enterprises, and they have their own IT practice, and so they pretty much lead it. And we do have our own professional services and our own group of people to help them ensure that they get success in the deployment, and we kind of help them in the initial phase until they are good to go on their own. So we do provide some assistance there if required for like really large rollouts, but then pretty much, they can run the show on their own if they choose to do so.
So this LAVA, which is the live attack virtualization simulation, is there a way for the people to see how bad the situation is prior to installation? Like, is there like a pre-deployment analysis tool?
Yes, we're kind of working on that. We've been working on that for the last year, and we plan to launch out technologies in that area very soon in the market. So yes, you'll be hearing more about that very soon, probably around RSA timeframe.
Oh, fantastic. I guess I look forward to hearing about that at RSA. Now, maybe as we go along here, I'd love to hear about Windows 10. So that was an announcement this past summer, but with Windows 10, your partnership with Microsoft, is there a difference in how our listeners would think about deploying Bromium or about the endpoint with Microsoft?
Yeah, so Microsoft has been a very close partner for the past few years. And I think it's probably very rare where Microsoft actually does a partnership with a security vendor. So we were really fortunate to have that, to get the blessing from Microsoft, particularly in the area of cybersecurity, which is a hot, big problem. So we have several strategic partnerships and plans with Microsoft in the near future. What I can talk about right now is from a Windows 10 perspective, we have been working with Microsoft to make sure that we are compatible and we work well with Windows products, not just Windows 10, whatever is coming ahead after Windows 10 as well, with our partnership and engagement. And at the same time, I think Microsoft is making very interesting moves. If you noticed, they added something called Device Guard, where they are doing stuff like they have their own Hyper-V or a lightweight hypervisor embedded in the operating system itself. So this is the first time probably where a commodity operating system like Microsoft Windows has a hypervisor. So I think it is a big move for the industry itself, because now people are kind of really seeing the benefits of virtualization in mainline products like Windows operating system. So we have been working very closely with Microsoft on some of these key technologies and making sure that first of all Bromium customers and Microsoft customers can work well with Windows 10 and the future revision, and at the same time we deliver value together as a security strategic with our partnership basically.
Well, I do like how the patching, one of the pieces about what's hard for Microsoft is the volume of patching that's required, not just on the Microsoft core operating systems, both on the server side or on the machines, the laptops and such, is the third party applications, and this is a challenge because the frequency of patching just becomes such a burden to especially the medium businesses and small businesses. But you have a very unique approach, which I think people need to hear about from you, is how does this help with patching frequencies and helping alleviate some of that burden from IT security departments. And then also with third parties, much of them leverage Java and Flash and such. So how do you see Bromium playing into that problem right now?
Yeah, actually, that's kind of the sweet spot for us to put it simply, because what will happen is now, first of all, the reality is that large enterprises, they are slow in patching, and it is a real problem. It is a really big problem. I would say one of the reasons why the malware authors thrive is because of this problem. Because no matter what you do, there's always a lag time. Sometimes it can be months in large organizations to make sure that they're up to date and fully patched, right? And this is kind of where Bromium provides a lot of value. Is as long as you have the Bromium solution, you don't need any signature updates. No updates are required. And you can, even patching, you can use patching only for functionality as opposed to security, because any internet-facing attack which comes will be limited in the context of the micro VM. A lot of our customers actually come back and tell us that, they see immediate return on investment because they see these attacks, light up in the environment, and then they suddenly realize that they were under attack simply because they couldn't patch in time. And Bromium gives them that air cover.
Yeah, I think this is a huge point, and I think it could be easily missed, is that we've talked about human error earlier on in the episode, and patching is, in my opinion, often human error related because it's a human not getting to patch the system due to whatever, either project overload, forgetfulness, but usually it's just because they're trying to keep pace with the business requirements. And it's also very difficult to plan out third-party patching because you actually have to plan to make sure that the system you're patching doesn't take down other systems as a result of the patching. So this is a big deal. And I think it's similar to the analogy with the human being who's getting infected. 100 years ago, 200 years ago, that used to kill someone when they used to get a bacterial infection. Now we can isolate it, put a Band-Aid on it, clean it, take some medicine and isolate it and still live. So I think that the interesting concept here that you're providing for people who need to patch large amounts of systems.
Yeah. And this is kind of one of our very obvious benefits you get out of using the technology.
So what else am I missing here that you want to make sure that our listeners hear? I don't do a whole lot of shows where we focus on specific technologies, but this one I found was Bromium, I feel, just has some specific wins for people that are very significant. Is there anything I've missed in asking that you want to highlight?
No, I think you have done some incredible research, so thank you for that. This is definitely one of those shows where I'm pleasantly surprised on the amount of depth of knowledge you have already about me and the product and the technology. So that's awesome. I think you've covered most of the key aspects. The whole idea is it's a completely different new way of doing security by isolating and not really trying to identify or preempt the attack by detecting it. At the same time, once that infection happens and is contained, what do you learn from the forensics piece and of evidence that was captured, right? Those are the key pieces of the equation which are paramount from an enterprise security point of view. So I think we have kind of covered most of it, the key pieces, I would say. Yeah.
Okay, that's good. And I think the new terms for people, and I know in reading through your is sandboxing, hardware enforced isolation, micro virtualization. I think these are the terms that I really learned about that kind of encapsulate these techniques that you're selling with the product and really educating people about. Is that these are the, from a security strategy point of view, Rahul, it's like in learning about this, this is the strategy I think security professionals need to be aware of is how do you micro virtualize your so that we can not let systems be taken down as a whole, but really have this isolation approach, which is very very different in the market.
Yeah, absolutely. And then when you talk about concept like sandboxing, so we kind of also like to stay away from that terminology. Although in theory it's the same thing where we're trying to contain an attack, but specifically when it comes to sandboxing, if you look at pretty much every application you have, every internet-facing critical application like IE, your Adobe Reader, your Office, and Chrome, and most of the browsers already have a sandbox, and that's already a layer of defense which has been inbuilt into the products in the last few years. And they have also shown a lot of success in because they raise the bar for attackers. But when you micro virtualize even a sandbox application, the cost to the attacker is much higher now because he just can't bypass the sandbox using a kernel exploit. You have to bypass a hypervisor, which is much harder than compared to an application sandbox. I'm not saying it's not impossible to do it, but it's just the cost is higher, right?
Oh, okay. So you're saying there's a difference between an application sandbox in the industry and or then jumping over the virtualization barrier.
That's right.
Okay,
That's right.
okay. So that's an important distinction, and that actually thanks for clarifying that because sometimes I think the security professionals that listen to these really just have to know the right questions to ask, not necessarily how every little piece is working, but just how the architecture of these different products that they have in their environment are working. Because I feel like sometimes security professionals are suffering from product overlap.
Oh yeah.
Product overlap. There's so many products installed on the network. They're all really good, except they're stumbling over each other.
Yeah. In my last 3-4 years in Bromium, I have spent a lot of time with the global CISOs, and this is a common theme I hear all the time. They have invested so much of money in so many products, and and the thing is that everybody is doing a specific job. So, and this is kind of a fundamental problem in the security industry is that it's so fragmented, right? It's all over the place, right? It's not like your Apple or Google. It's like for every attack vector, there is a company literally. Right, so and it can be confusing as well. If you're a buyer with so many terminologies and so many claims, it can be pretty challenging. So the way I kind of advocate looking at any stack is first of all look at your various layers of defenses that you have, right? And inevitably you will see that architecturally looking, most of these layers of defense will typically have the same weakness, which is each of them are looking at some kind of a signature. Right, so there people have an architectural limitation when it comes to a layered defense strategy, right? So you should try to create different models or different approaches when you build out a layered defense stack, because if fundamentally you are just looking at different types of signatures at different layers, you have a fundamental limitation across the board of all your products that you have bought. Right, so I think it's kind of important to understand the architectural limitations of each technology. And of course, Bromium has its own limitations as well. It's not, we can't solve every problem which is there on the internet, but we can try to solve a pretty big chunk of the problem, right? Similarly, I think it's pretty useful exercise to go through every product and architecture, understand the weaknesses, and so that you can cover those gaps with something else. And the layers which are kind of overlapping can be significantly reduced with that, and it can also be pretty cost efficient as well in the long run.
Well, that's great. Thank you for that advice. That I think that was very very timely as we wrap up. So actually two final questions for you. One, what is your favorite new technology coming up right now that it doesn't have to be related to Bromium, but it could be? I noticed you were the advisor to Hive, I guess. That looked interesting. But maybe you have some others you would want to mention on the show.
So I'm a technologist at heart. So I like to solve problems and work with smarter people with me so that I can learn from others as well. So one of the problems which I'm seeing is that there is so much of data around. We just have too much of data across the board, from ranging from malware to in pretty much every aspect of technology. You will see that now suddenly we have built so many products and technologies, and now we are left with too much of data which we just cannot process or make sense of. So that's an intriguing area. I think that at some point, data science and security will intersect. We are not quite there yet. There are very interesting technologies and intriguing technologies being built as we speak to kind of take on those challenges. It's still early days, but I do believe that in the next few years, there will be an intersection of these two areas. And that's one of the reasons why I work with an incubator called the Hive, where we really look at objectively various problems in data science and how can security solve some of these problems, and does it even make sense, right? So that's kind of an interesting area which I'm very intrigued by, because the results can be very widespread, ranging from fraud detection in large networks to fighting malware in huge troves of data, and so on. And so I think the applications can be pretty big. So that's an area where I have been pretty interested in and have been following for the past few years.
What do you feel about machine learning and uses of machine learning and artificial intelligence to start to learn and provide some of these defense mechanisms?
Yeah, I think machine learning has been there for decades now, right? It's something which has been evolving. There are a lot of interesting innovation happening in this area. I would say it's still early days to really see how these pan out, because when you're creating a model based of machine learning, or people may call it artificial intelligence, or in that area, the biggest challenge which you will always face would be false positives, and that's something can be very disruptive for workflows and for people. And that is going to be something which is not going to be easy to solve. That's something which, specifically if you're trying to prevent and block an attack. So that's a challenge which the industry has to figure out. And I think it'll be a while before we get there.
Yeah, potentially it's going to take a little bit of time. Well, as we wrap up, I noticed that you have a couple different stress relievers here that I noticed from a previous interview. One was PlayStation, another one was cricket, and another one was spending time with your family. So at this point in time, what do you find is best in the profession to kind of bring down your stress level, being in the security profession and being and helping people essentially protect things and help people feel more secure? What do you do for yourself to make sure that you're at the top of your game and that you are fully optimized for performance and low stress but high capabilities every day?
Yeah, it's been pretty busy. It's been like I've traveled like hundreds and thousands of miles in the last few years. Incredible experience, but I agree the stress levels are also there. So you have to manage yourself. So my latest hobby has been kayaking. So right behind my house there's a lake. In the mornings I go kayaking for a couple of hours. It's very peaceful. Just be with nature, birds, and relax. It's almost like a form of meditation. I used to meditate and be active with yoga and similar disciplines earlier, but I probably have to restart that at some point. But right now, what I do is going for kayaking, and taking a break and just being with myself.
do you do that every day or a couple times a week, or?
But yeah, I try to do it at least once or twice a week, typically on the weekends, because I'm kind of traveling most of the week.
Right.
So, but that's kind of something which I really find relaxing for me, which really works very well. And then, of course, my PS3 has been replaced with an Xbox One.
Oh my! I was going to say this probably has been replaced, but I wasn't sure which one. But Xbox One. Do you have a favorite game?
Yeah, so Call of Duty is what I have been playing for a while. I don't get enough time, but I do love playing some online games, multiplayer action games. Yeah.
Oh, that's great. Well, I think it's important for people to really craft something that's personal for them, that gives them a sense of relief and from the stress. But thanks for sharing your pieces, because I think hopefully some of our listeners will take that and complete maybe some of their New Year's resolutions to integrate some of this into their own lives.
Yeah.
So I want to thank you for your time today, Rahul. Thank you for being on the program.
It's a delight, Bill. Thanks for having me.
Okay, we'll see you at RSA.
See you.
So this wraps up episode number 40 with Rahul with Bromium. I hope you enjoyed learning about security from an isolation and a virtualization perspective. It's very, very interesting and fascinating what they're doing at Bromium. In addition to this, the episode is sponsored by CIO Scoreboard. If you are a CIO a CISO or someone who reports to a CIO or CISO, go to visualcio.com. Again, that's visualcio.com, and learn more about the CIO Security Scoreboard. Thanks very much, everybody, and we'll see you on episode number 41. So there you have it. This wraps another episode of Bill Murphy's Red Zone podcast. To get all the relevant show notes, please go to our blog at www.redzonetech.net/podcast. Additionally, make sure you go to iTunes and leave your comments in iTunes about the show. This helps our show rankings enormously, and it helps support the show. Until next time, I appreciate you very much for listening. Thank you.